Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. In today's video, we are continuing a recent series that I've been doing on the channel where I talk about and preview the upcoming 2020-21 season for every NBA team. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about the Chicago Bulls. But before I get too far into it, I want to remind you all to leave a like and subscribe. I've been appreciating all the support that I've been receiving lately, and I hope to see that continue. Without further ado, let's talk about the Bulls. But before we can preview the upcoming 2020-21 season, we have to go back and reflect upon the past offseason. And in this offseason, the Bulls made some interesting draft picks and made some free agency signings that don't get anyone too excited. So let's break that down a little bit. They selected Patrick Williams with the 4th overall pick. This was not a pick that I really agreed with. I think that there were better options on the board at this point, so I don't really love that pick all that much for the Bulls. But I do think that Williams fits with their core. He's going to bring a plus defender to this team in the long term, a guy who's already going to be ready to be at least a league average defensive player as soon as he comes into the league. The second he sets foot on an NBA floor, he's going to be a good defensive player. More of the questions come on the offensive end. He shot the ball pretty well off of the dribble last season at Florida State, but he struggles a little bit more in catch and shoot scenarios, which is obviously where he's going to have to grow quite a bit, because I think that he'll likely be asked to shoot the ball in catch and shoots more frequently than he is off of the bounce, considering what his projected role will be in an NBA system. He also has shown a bit of an ability to playmake for his teammates, which could make him an interesting player moving forward as a forward who can playmake. I really like Denny Avdia for that reason, and Williams has a chance to do a bit of that too. The question with him is if he can score the ball at a high level, and I really doubt that he can. He's got to improve that three-point shot, and he has to work on defensively becoming more of a playmaker instead of just somebody that makes the right rotations and the right reads. He has to get to a point where he can actually create transition opportunities for his team by getting steals and blocks. But if he can do that, then this pick will look much better than it did at the time. And I do think that there is a solid chance that Patrick Williams develops into that player, that elite 3-and-D type guy. So for that reason, while I don't love the pick, and I think there were better options like Tyrese Halliburton, like Denny Avdia, I would have even said Onyeka Okongwu would have been a better option than Patrick Williams for the Bulls, despite the positional fit not being the best. But because of that chance that Williams booms and becomes an elite 3-and-D guy, similar to like Robert Covington, but not as good of a shooter, while being maybe a bit better on ball than Rocco is, then that will certainly be worth the 4th pick. And because of that, I won't hate the Bulls too much for it. In the second round, they drafted Marko Siminovic with the 44th overall pick. I didn't know much about this guy going into the draft. I did not have him on my board as 46 players that I thought would be rotation players at some point in their NBA careers, but I kind of wish I would have known a bit more about this guy, because Siminovic seems pretty interesting to me as a player who has some potential to become a pick and pop big man who has shown an ability to shoot it from the 3-point line. So that certainly is valuable in the NBA. Any type of floor spacing is great, especially coming from the big man positions. So I do think that Siminovic was a solid pick for them in the second round, and if he comes over to the United States and joins their team within the next couple of years, I think that there's a chance that he can be an impactful backup big man. They also signed Devon Dotson to a 2-way contract following the draft. Dotson was not on my top 46 players that I thought would develop into rotation pieces, but he was one of the players that was right outside of that, kind of in like the 47 to 55 type range. So I think that he probably should have been drafted, and the fact that he wasn't makes this seem like a pretty good signing for the Bulls Getting him on a two-way contract was one of the better two-way guys. He's got some burst as a point guard and has shown an ability to create for his teammates a little bit too. So because of that, I like that two-way pickup, and I think that the Bulls did an all-right job in the draft, although I do think that there were better options with the fourth pick. In free agency, they offered Denzel Valentine the qualifying offer, and they didn't offer it to Shaq Harrison or Chris Dunn, which were three decisions that I disagreed with all three. Thought Chris Dunn should have gotten it, thought Shaq Harrison should have gotten it, and I didn't think Denzel Valentine should have. But they did what they did, and Valentine is coming back on a $3.7 million deal, I believe. We'll talk about him a bit more later, but I just want to say that I didn't completely agree with them making the move to keep him on the roster while letting Chris Dunn and Shaq Harrison walk. They also signed Garrett Temple to a one-year, $5 million deal. Temple, I don't think is quite worth $5 million at this point in his career. We'll talk about him a bit more later as well. They signed Noah Vonleh to a minimum contract. Vonleh has shown flashes of potential. Another guy we'll talk about a bit more in a bit. But now we will preview the 2020-2021 Chicago Bulls and talk about each player on their roster and kind of give my expectations for what each player is capable of providing to this team. We'll start at the point guard position with the guy that I believe is going to be running the point for this team, and that would be Tomas Satoransky. I get that Coby White had a great couple games prior to the season ending, and I do think that he is probably the player with the highest potential on this Bulls roster, but I still think that Satoransky should start over him at the point guard position just because of the fit between Coby White and Zach LaVine is not very good. I don't really view Coby White as a pure point guard type. I don't think you can because of his playmaking deficiencies, but I like the fit between Satoransky and LaVine. Satoransky is a good defensive player who plays well in rotations and is going to be able to take on some of the tougher perimeter matchups that LaVine would struggle with. Obviously, he's not a great athlete, Satoransky that is, so he won't be able to completely cover for LaVine on the defensive end, but he's smart in rotations, he's a good team defender, and on the offensive end, he's a really nice playmaker, doesn't need the ball in his hands a whole lot. In the past, has shown an ability to really be a knockdown shooter on catch and shoot opportunities. He struggled this past season and had one of the worst three-point shooting seasons of his career, which isn't a great sign if you are a Bulls fan. But I do still think that there's a chance that he can bounce back from that. And even if he doesn't, his ability to give you solid defensive contributions, play make for his teammates, those are valuable enough that he at least belongs in a rotation and, in my opinion, should be the at least opening day starter for the Bulls heading into this 2020-2021 season. The other, I don't even know if I should classify him as a point guard, but Coby White, obviously, I said it before, I think that he has the most potential out of any player on this Bulls roster, and well, basically, here's why. I think the comparison for Coby White is Jamal Murray. He is a lead guard who is mostly focused on scoring, doesn't do a whole lot of creation for his teammates, and is actually pretty good at scoring. I get that Coby White's efficiency for the entirety of the season was not very good, but in his last 10 games, I think he averaged 24 points per game on 49, 39, 85% shooting. Those are excellent efficiency measures, and 23 points per game is no small task. That's a pretty impressive accomplishment for someone in his rookie season, even if it was in a small sample size. I also believe that Coby White at some point is going to develop into a better playmaker for his teammates. He has plenty of speed, plenty of athleticism, plenty of burst that's going to allow him to get in the lane and create open looks for his teammates. Now it just comes down to making the right reads in those situations. And I do think that with the amount of floor spacing on this team, I do think that that's something that can develop with Coby White. And if it does, I think that he has a good chance of making an all-star game, and similar to Colin Sexton with the Cleveland Cavaliers, a team that I talked about a couple days ago, I do think that Coby White will make an all-star game at some point in his career because I think that he's going to be a really high-volume scorer, and if that playmaking can come along, there's a chance that he can be a really impactful player on winning teams. The third point guard on this team is Ryan Arcidiacono. He hasn't shown much in his couple seasons in the NBA, but he's been competent enough as a backup or third point guard on a team that he's been able to hold on to a roster spot with the Bulls. He's kind of similar to Satoransky in that he's a decent playmaker who takes care of the ball and is at least an average defensive player, but where Arcidiacono needs to improve is his jump shot. If he can start knocking down three-pointers, then that will make him a very valuable player, especially alongside guys like Coby White and Zach LaVine that are going to have the ball in their hands a lot. If Arcidiacono can focus on the defensive end of the floor and become a good floor spacer for those guys, that's where his value can come for the Chicago Bulls. If he can't improve that three-point shot, I don't really see a place for him in the NBA. Moving on to the wing, it starts with Zach LaVine for this team. He is clearly the best wing that they have. Similar to Coby White, he is a high-volume scorer, but there's questions on whether or not that really impacts winning for a team. He has struggled with turnover problems in the past. He's not a very good shot creator for his teammates, not a great playmaker whatsoever. And on defense, he's struggled. Although last season, it did seem like he started to show some improvement on that end of the floor and really start working harder and using his athleticism as an advantage on the defensive end. However, he's still far from good. I'm not even sure I would call him average at this point. And he really needs to take steps forward on that end of the floor in order for his play to really be impactful on a winning team. I still think that Zach LaVine is a very good player, and I think that he's been very much undervalued by a lot of people. He's not on a bad contract. I think there's 2 years, $39 million remaining on his contract, which is very cheap for a player who's probably playing at like a borderline all-star type level. I don't think that he would be a great option to score the ball and take up as many possessions as he does if he were on a good team. But on a team like the Bulls, when he has the ball in his hands for the amount of time that he does, then you just have to count on him to be that leading scorer. I think that he would be an interesting trade piece for the Bulls because I think that Coby White has a chance to really take a step forward this season and play a similar role to what LaVine has done. Like I said, I think Coby White can take a Jamal Murray type step as just an elite scorer and hopefully take a step forward to being a better playmaker. And for that reason, I'd like to see him get more minutes at the 2 position, which is currently being taken up in large part by Zach LaVine. I think that you could get some solid return value if you're the Bulls, probably something like a rotation player, a young player, and a draft pick. So I would certainly be looking to move on from Zach LaVine if I were the Bulls. However, if he does stay around, he's going to be the best player on this team, and due to the lack of offensive talent surrounding him in the starting lineup, I think that if he's still a Chicago Bull, he's got a good shot at making an all-star team. Denzel Valentine is another wing player on this team. Like I said before, I didn't love that they gave him the qualifying offer just because of his injury history. He's had a hard time staying on the floor, and he's also not a great shooter, but he does have some good parts of his game. He has a great feel for the game, which allows him to be a good passer. He's also a good defender because of that feel for the game, and it allows him to be a plus rebounder from a guard position. But because of the injury history, because of his not great athleticism, he doesn't have much spark off the bounce. He can't really get around people all that well. That really limits how well he can use his playmaking, and I don't think that he is worth a $3.7 million contract at this point. But he is still young. He has that playmaking ability. He has his defensive skills. So I don't think that it's a terrible move for the Bulls. I just would rather have had Chris Dunn or Shaq Harrison than I would Denzel Valentine. Garrett Temple, another wing player that they recently brought in on that 1-year, $5 million contract. He's known as a 3-and-D guy who can play the 1 or the 2, but at this point in his career, I think he's much more of a 2. But the three-point shot really isn't there anymore. He has shot it under 35% in each of the last 2 seasons, if I'm not mistaken. I think last year he was right around 32.5%. I might be completely wrong about that, but I think I remember seeing that. If he's shooting the three-pointer that poorly, then you can't really make a case for him being in an NBA rotation. I get it, he's a good defensive player, but he's not a defensive playmaker. He pretty much just plays well in team rotations, makes good choices on the defensive end, and has a good feel for the game. He's not a guy who's going to create transition opportunities with steals or with blocks or anything like that. However, he is known as a great locker room guy. Everybody around the NBA loves him and acknowledges him as a great leader. So on a 1-year deal, there's certainly much worse that you could do if you are the Bulls. Otto Porter is another wing player, a skilled 3-and-D wing guy, really has shot the ball at a high level when he's been healthy, and unfortunately the key phrase there is when he's been healthy. He's really missed large portions of the last 2 seasons ever since the Bulls traded for him with a multitude of injuries. He needs to stay on the court to be effective, but when he is on the court, he's a super valuable player, especially to a good team. He's a knockdown three-point shooter, over 40% for his career, and he plays plus defense. Those 2 skills alone make you a super valuable player, and for that reason, if he can come back and show he's healthy, I believe that his expiring deal could be something that teams could look at on the trade market if they're looking to add one more wing to push them over the top. A team like Dallas specifically that is looking to retain cap space moving into next season, but could still use some help defensively and shooting-wise on the wing, would make a lot of sense for me, just to add another guy who can help you win this year while also keeping that cap space open for next year by acquiring and expiring. But outside of that, Porter can really help the Bulls out with his ability to space the floor for guys like Zach LaVine and Coby White. And on defense, he does a nice job covering up for guys such as those 2 that struggle on that end of the floor. Patrick Williams is a guy I've already talked about quite a bit, so I won't go too in-depth into him, but I think that he's kind of similar to Otto Porter as a guy that you want to be taking a lot of threes and playing good defense. However, I do think that he's a better defensive player than Otto is due to his ability to get steals and blocks. He's a terrific team defender, and his on-ball stuff needs to get a bit better, but he's really good on the defensive end, where I think Otto Porter sets himself apart from Patrick Williams at the moment, and the reason why I consider Porter to be the better player is because Porter is a 40% three-point shooter for his career, with seasons where he was as high as 43%, whereas Patrick Williams struggles with his three-point shot on catch and shoots. So if Patrick Williams can start shooting at the level Otto Porter is, then I think that's what makes Patrick Williams a high-level player, a high-level role player who you really want as your 4th or 5th best player on a winning team. The last wing here before we move on to the big guys is Chandler Hutchinson. Hutchinson is the kind of wings that all NBA teams love because he's athletic, he's got a long wingspan, and he's fairly tall. However, he's got to shoot the ball at a higher level to become a true 3-and-D wing. I believe he's shooting around 30% for his career, and that is simply just not going to get it done. He's got the defensive stuff down. He's an average defender already. Now he just has to improve his three-point shooting, and if he can do that, I believe he'll be a rotation mainstay for an NBA team for years to come. Moving on to the big man positions, we'll start with Lauri Markkanen, a guy, along with Zach LaVine and Otto Porter, that I really view as tradable assets. I think that Markkanen could probably fetch a first-round pick and a young player due to the flashes of maybe even all-star potential that he has shown I am not a big believer in Lauri Markkanen because he struggles on the defensive end of the floor. He really can only guard fours because he's not strong enough to guard big guys in the post, and he's not quick enough laterally to guard players on the perimeter. So overall, like I said, he can really only guard four guys on the defensive end of the floor, and he can't even do that well. So you're pretty much getting nothing but negatives from Lauri on the defensive side. On offense, he can really shoot it for a big guy. He can come off of screens like few other big men can in the NBA, and he's a knockdown shooter. However, he has next to no shot creation ability. He is not much of a playmaker at all, and he's not a great finisher at the rim either. He can have as many dunks over NBA superstars as he wants. I still don't think, and the numbers certainly don't think, that Lauri Markkanen is a good finisher. So when push comes to shove, he's a guy who can shoot at a high level but can't do much else. And for that reason, I would look to capitalize on him while he still has some trade value if I were the Chicago Bulls. He's on a deal that expires after this season, and he will be a restricted free agent. And as I've mentioned in the past with guys like Lonzo Ball and guys like John Collins and even Devontae Graham, I'm a fan of moving off of players one season before they become restricted, because so often we see restricted free agents get overpaid and then teams feel that they have to match it to keep their players in-house, and they end up overpaying for guys that don't really fit their scheme or aren't perfect long-term solutions. So I think that the Bulls can do a better job at the four. I think that if Patrick Williams comes in and looks like a four guy, then that's another reason you could trade Lauri. So overall, he's a guy that I would look to move on from. But if he is on this team, once again, another floor spacer. And I think that that's really the path to success if the Bulls want to make a run at a playoff spot. They have to have floor spacing around Zach LaVine and Coby White and let those guys create for their teammates. Another big guy is Thad Young. Thad just seemed out of place last season with the Bulls. In the past, he's always been a good defensive player who can do a bit of playmaking out of the forward positions, but this past season, he struggled defensively. Well, he didn't struggle, but he was merely average defensively, which was a real downgrade from his Indiana years where he was one of the better big wing defenders in the entirety of the NBA. On the offensive end, he just never seemed to put it together. Shot the three ball all right, but it just didn't seem like he had a great level of buy-in. And maybe that can turn around in this upcoming season under new coach Billy Donovan. But if it doesn't, I think that he's probably a guy that needs a change of scenery. And considering he's getting paid $13 million annually, the Bulls might have to attach an asset in order to offload that contract. Finally, now that we've gone through kind of the power forward position, we'll move on to the true centers on this team. It starts with Wendell Carter Jr. I know that he thinks of himself as a four, apparently. I think I read that somewhere, but I still view him as a true center. Although he does have some floor spacing capabilities that could allow him to play the four a little bit, he can't quite guard on the perimeter at a high enough level where I would be comfortable rolling him out at that position too frequently. On the defensive end, he's pretty good at protecting the rim. It doesn't show in his blocks per game stuff. He's not a super great shot blocker, but he does a good job of getting off good shot contests and limiting the percentages that opponents can shoot at the rim, which is super valuable. He's a good defensive player overall and can probably be used a little bit in a switching scheme, but is probably best off in a drop coverage scheme where his rim protection abilities can be utilized to their fullest. But on offense, he needs a coach that's going to use him better than Jim Boylen did. Boylen tried to limit him as a post-up rim-running center when he's actually capable of spacing the floor and shooting the three at a decent rate. So I'd like to see Billy Donovan try to push the envelope there a little bit more and allow him to be a bit more free on the offensive end of the floor. I'm not a huge Wendell Carter fan, and I know I might seem a little down on the Bulls because I'm not a huge Markkanen fan and I'm not a huge Carter fan, but I do really like Coby White. So I think that this team has a decent future moving forward building around Coby White. But I don't view Carter as like a future all-star as some people do. I do think that he'll be a starting center in the NBA for a long time, but I don't think that he has that upside that some people did when he went 6th overall in the 2018 NBA draft. Like I said, long-term starting center. But is he going to end up being the 6th best player from that draft class? I don't think so. Outside of him at the center position, you have Daniel Gafford and Noah Vonleh, two somewhat promising young big men. Vonleh has shown flashes of ball handling and three-point shooting, and he's a pretty good rebounder as well, and he's athletic enough that he should be switchable onto the perimeter, but he just hasn't really put it together yet, and I was a big fan of the Bulls bringing him on a minimum contract. I think that there's a chance that he really puts it all together and ends up showcasing that talent and becoming an NBA level, maybe a bottom tier starter, maybe a good backup, but he's going to be an NBA level center, and I'm a big fan of this signing for the Chicago Bulls. He also had a stint there, and I think he was a little bit successful during his time in Chicago before, so perhaps this is a good fit for him. Daniel Gafford is a pretty run-of-the-mill, rim-running, shot-blocking big man. He needs to get better in other aspects of his game. He's very foul-prone, and he's not a very good rebounder either, but I think that there's a lot of, who's your standard rim-running big man? Like, Cody Zeller? JaVale McGee? That kind of player where, he does some good things for you, but he's probably not a real difference maker on a playoff team. Finally, the last two guys on this roster are Luke Cornett and Cristiano Felicio, two centers that I don't think too much of. Felicio could be interesting because he's an $8 million expiring contract, so that could be used in a trade to try to match contract levels with other teams, and outside of that, I don't see much value in him as a player. And Luke Cornett is like a theoretical floor spacing big man, but I was looking at his percentages, and he really can't shoot it all that well. So, not too much going on with either of those two guys, and I think that it's alright that I just kind of glossed over them. So in summary, the Bulls have some intriguing young pieces like Coby White and Patrick Williams and Wendell Carter, and they also have some veterans that I could see them moving on from, like Zach LaVine, Otto Porter, and Lauri Markkanen. But really, they are just kind of a mumbo-jumbo of interesting stuff. I don't even know what I'm saying right now, but I don't think that this team is ready to make a jump into the playoffs. Maybe they could contend for the 8th seed, and I do think that there is a decent chance that they can get into one of those 9th or 10th seeds as a play-in team. But I don't know, this Bulls team is really weird to me because I think that there's a chance that they go all in on this season. They come in locked in camp. They have a new coach, new front office, and they make a run at being the 7th seed or the 8th seed. But I could also see it where this team starts off the season in a slump and the front office feels pressure to move off of some of the veterans like LaVine and Porter in exchange for some younger players. So there's some different paths for this team. They can trigger another rebuild, which wouldn't make a lot of sense because they're just coming off of one, but I actually think it's the right idea. Try to get some more young talent around Coby White that fits the roster well, or they can continue with the roster as is, which I don't think is the best idea because I don't see a player on this team that could potentially be a top 2 guy on a championship team outside of Coby White, but I also think that Zach LaVine really restricts what Coby White can do. So I guess to really wrap this all up, I think Zach LaVine should be traded if I were the Chicago Bulls. If I were to make a record prediction for this team, I think that they would likely win somewhere between 30 and 35 games in a regular NBA season. So in this shortened year, I will say that they are probably a 25 to 31 win team. And I think I would probably lean towards them being on the higher end of that, depending on what moves they make at the trade deadline. Let me know what you think about the Bulls in the comments section down below. I'm sure that there are lots of Bulls fans that don't love my takes about their team, but that's all right. I want to give my honest opinion, and like I said, I'm very high on Coby White, and I think he's one of the better young players in the entirety of the NBA. Leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. I think that's it for me. Ladies and gentlemen, I will see you all again very soon.